Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday, June 22nd, 9:52 a.m. I wanted to kind of do a follow-up video to my last, not my last video, but I did a video on paganism with a Catholic mask, I think it was called, and I was pretty fired up in that video, and so I realized I probably didn't explain things as thoroughly as I should have. So don't do videos if you're ranting and you're mad. But I kind of want to get into that a little bit deeper. And a commenter had brought up something in that video in the comment section about how they had recently started learning about St. Hildegard. And this St. Hildegard talks about crystals and healing and energy. And the commenter said they were quite frankly confused about it because obviously in the year 2022, we associate the crystals and healing and energy with the New Age movement. So how could a saint, a doctor of the church, be embracing that? And I think I struggled with the same questions. And through a lot of prayer and a lot of meditation and a lot of learning, I have realized that, so for me, like, I'm a pretty black and white person. So obviously if the New Age is using crystals, then I don't want anything to do with them. And so I put them in my mind in this banished category, right? But I have realized through some meditation and prayer and things like that, that the devil is really in the details. And so even looking back in history, right? So we have like the old pagan world. And while they understood true religion in the sense that it had to do with true worship, had to do with sacrifice. They understood that. But the disorder came in on what they were sacrificing to, obviously all these false demon gods, in what they were sacrificing, and a lot of times it was human children. And so that wasn't pleasing to God. And so while their practices, like their idea that sacrifice is tied to worship was true, the devil comes in and distorts it. He uses what's already there. He uses the truths that are already there and he distorts it. And so that's what we have to be careful of as Catholics, not banishing whole ideas because that's kind of what the devil wants, to be honest with you. And I'm going to show you why. I'm going to use this crystal example to explain it better. And so a surefire way to make sure you're not falling into a pagan trap, this is how I look at it. Number one, is the whatever you're being presented with, is it presenting you with a way of enlightenment outside of Christ and his sacraments? If so, then it's wrong. And so that's why I was so upset by that website that I pulled up, because it was clearly invoking Eastern pagan practices for spiritual benefits. And so that's something we as Catholics steer clear from, because we have the ultimate enlightenment, which can be found in our sacraments. And so how do we achieve enlightenment as Catholics? Well, number one, virtue, staying out of sin, because sin makes you stupid. It clouds your intellect. It darkens your intellect, is what the doctors of the church say. But even more importantly than that, how do we stay out of sin? And how do we achieve enlightenment, superhuman enlightenment beyond that? So that would be the human way of achieving natural enlightenment, would be to live a virtuous life. But superhuman speaking, divinely speaking, the sacraments. The sacraments do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And so that's the problem with these pagan religions. And even if you look at Freemasonry, which I talk about a lot, they have this idea of achieving ultimate transcendence, ultimate enlightenment without Jesus Christ. And as Catholics, we know that to be false. And we know that you have to have faith and works. They go hand in hand. And that's what differentiates Catholicism from any other religion on planet Earth, is that fact right there. We understand that we have to have Christ in the spiritual and physical sense, and we have to have good works, which is the virtue building and things like that. So anything that tells you there's another way to achieve peace or enlightenment, even though the methods may look very similar to what you have to get away from it. And so meditation comes to mind, right? So you have this like Headspace app, which I talk about, which is all Eastern mysticism, how to meditate in the sense of the Eastern word. Whereas Catholics, if you're not educated in your faith, you say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. We are told to meditate too. But the difference being, we are told to meditate on the life of Christ. That's what the whole rosary is. We meditate on the mysteries. We don't just meditate for the sake of meditating. We have a purpose. And that purpose is to bring us closer to the divine. So anything that claims that it's going to help you achieve spiritual progress and enlightenment outside of Christ and his church is automatically something we stay away from. And so now we'll bring this back to the crystals. When Saint Hildegard talks about using crystals for healing, she is not talking about using them outside of God, or outside of, or basically to achieve enlightenment. She describes them as having certain properties that God can use, and she says this very clearly throughout her writings. It's not the crystals themselves, although everything on earth has its own properties, right? But where you get in trouble is, one, assigning power to something outside of God, because now you're separating the creation from the creator. So you get into trouble there. You open yourself up with the demonic there. Number two, what purpose are you using that object for? A lot of times we see with the New Age movement, they're using it for what I just talked about, trying to achieve enlightenment. For example, if you put an amethyst on your third eye, it'll open up your third eye and you'll increase your psychic powers. Now that is totally anti-Christian, because number one, we don't worry about psychic powers. We don't do that. If God wants to give somebody the gift of prophecy, he will, is how we look at it. We don't try to obtain, these powers on our own. It's part of witchcraft. And then number three, I forgot. So using them for, so Hildegard talks about using them to overcome vice. And so a lot of times these New Agers have no concept of vice or sin. They don't believe in sin. So they're obviously not using crystals to overcome vice and sin. They're using them for love spells. They're using them to create peace in the home. And these are all outside of God. So this is all not good. This is not what they were intended for. And then number three, I had it written down. Just give me 1 second because it's escaping my mind. On one of these pitfalls, let's see. Using them in accordance with false rites or rituals such as Eastern practices, the occult, ancient Egyptian practices, etc. I said using them to promote vice instead of virtue. For example, making someone fall in love with you. Thinking they have power in and of themselves separate from God, and invoking an impersonal energy. That's very important because that will open you right up to the demonic. That idea of an impersonal earth energy or something, that opens you right up to the pagan spirits. And I would like to add, you have to be very careful if you're going to buy crystals and things like that, where you get them from. It's like I say with everything else, the herbs, oil, essential oils, everything, you have to be extraordinarily careful because the New Age has hijacked the elements of the earth. The devil's in control. And so a lot of these, if you order them online, come from esoteric shops, which are infested with demons. A lot of them, they'll say they're putting their intentions into it while making it. Stay away from that. You don't want anybody's intentions, energy, nothing in your products. You want them from as close to the source as possible, from a non-spiritual aspect, unless it's Christian and they're making these things invoking the Blessed Mother or something like that. So like when I make my tinctures, I say prayers, Christian prayers. I invoke the Blessed Mother, things like that. That's fine, but you don't find that too much online. It's usually the ones who are selling this stuff are into the esoteric and the occult or Eastern mysticism. So you want to stay right away from that. I've talked about that with the homeopathic brands. That is not a secular brand. That is not purely scientific. That comes with rituals and intentions. Anything, rituals, intentions, and if you don't know, ask the person. And if you don't get an answer, just try to find another source that doesn't do any of that. It's the same thing with these crystals. Get them as close to like the mind, whoever their mind or whatever, as you possibly can. So I want to read what St. Hildegard actually says about crystals and stones. And the other thing I want to say before I do that is I think it's important to understand that there's a biblical basis for stones in the Bible. So we have the New Jerusalem is adorned with all these stones, these precious stones in the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. You have Christ, I think it is, being described with many diadems on his head, which are crystals. And there's also this understanding that God uses the elements for miracles, for healing. He puts his power into his creation. He likes to, that's why we have sacramentals. He likes to assign specific things for specific purposes. Why? Because he's a God of order. He made the creation. And so look at Adam and Eve, right? Did he create Adam out of nothing? No, he created Adam out of clay and Eve from Adam. Look at the book of Tobias. I always forget if it's called, I think it's called the book of Tobit, but Archangel, is it Raphael or Gabriel? I get them confused. I think it's Raphael, Archangel Raphael comes and tells Tobias that he has to get this, something, a part of a certain fish. And that's how he's going to ward off, that's how he's going to get rid of the demon that's harassing his future wife. And many times Jesus uses things when he's here. So that's Old Testament. But then when Jesus is here himself, he tells blind people to bend down and, make a paste with clay to heal their blindness. We see healing waters everywhere. We see the wedding feast at Cana. Does he just make wine appear out of thin air? No, there's water involved. There's big barrels involved. He multiplies the bread and fishes. Does he do that? Does he create bread and fishes? No. He uses what's available and he makes it better. And so that's the difference between God and Satan. God uses the elements and makes them bountiful and for our purposes because he loves us and works his powers through these, elements. And then Satan tries to mimic that. So he uses the elements for his nefarious purposes through his minions and things like that. And so that's where we have to understand using crystals is not bad. But we can easily, as Catholics, especially because we are uneducated in these matters, fall into these pagan pitfalls. It's not just crystals. It's a lot of things. And so you don't want, don't start using them for invoking anything or spiritual vibrations, psychic powers, love, to make someone fall in love with you. These are all pagan. They should be used to overcome vices, to overcome deform physical ailments, in order to heal things like that, but never for the opposite. Never, like I said, the love and peace and all that. That's not for us, guys. And so I think it's important that we shed light on this because our elements have been stolen from us and we as Christians need to reclaim them. Not only that, but we're about to come up here on a time. I don't know if it's going to be in my lifetime or not, but by the way things are going, sooner than later, where we're going to be reduced to a much simpler life, where we're going to have to understand the elements. We're going to have to understand what God has given us. He has equipped us on this earth with everything we need. Medicinally speaking, spiritually speaking, food, physically, things like that. Like, we have everything we need here. It's a problem of misinformation and mismanagement of the elements, mismanagement of the resources. And so we're coming up on a time here where this stuff is going to be very important because I think the world as we know it in the future is going to be very, very different. So I know I'm rambly, but I get passionate about this topic. So I'm reading right from the other thing with Hildegard. You have to be careful about who is spreading her education because it gets twisted with the esoteric people, twist everything she says for their own purposes. So I'm reading right now, right from her book, Physica, the complete English translation of her classic work on health and healing, translated from the Latin. And this is book 4 on stones. And you're going to find this very, very interesting, I think. She says the following. Every stone contains fire and moisture. The devil abhors, detests, and disdains precious stones. This is because he remembers that their beauty was manifest on him before he fell from the glory God had given him, and because some precious stones are engendered from fire in which he receives his punishment. And I also want to point something out that popped into my mind earlier. The great monarchs, right? The Catholic monarchs of old. What did they wear on their heads? They wore jewels, the crown jewels. And so is it any wonder that the gates of hell quite literally attacked the monarchy? This is not stones, precious stones, jewels. They're for Christians, I'm telling you. Precious stones and gems arise in the Orient, in areas where the sun's heat is very great. From the hot sun, mountains there have heat as powerful as fire. The rivers in those areas always boil from the sun's great heat, whence at times an inundation of those rivers bursts forth and ascends those scorching mountains. The mountains burning with the sun's heat are touched by those rivers. Froth, similar to that produced by hot iron or a hot stone when water is poured over it, exudes from the places where the water touches the fire. This froth adheres to that place and in 3 or 4 days hardens into stone. Once the inundation has ceased and the waters have returned to the riverbed, the pieces of froth dry up. They dry from the sun's heat and take their colors and powers in accordance with the time of day and the temperature. Drying and hardening, they become precious stones and fall into the sand just like flaking fish scales. When they flood again, the rivers lift up many of the stones, carrying them to other countries where they are later discovered by human beings. The mountains, where so many and such large stones have sprung up in this way, shine like the light of day. And so precious stones are born from fire and water. And obviously we know now a little bit more than Hildegard, so we know like whatchamacallit, why can't I think of diamonds, for example, are born from pressure and coal and things like that. But this is what she says. They contain many powers and are effective for many needs. Many things can be done with them, but only good, honest actions which are beneficial to human beings, not activities of seduction, fornication, adultery, and enmity, homicide, and the like, which tend toward vice and which are injurious to people. The nature of these precious stones seeks honest and useful effects and rejects people's depraved and evil uses. In the same way, virtues cast off vices, and vices are unable to engage with virtues. Some stones do not originate from these mountains and are not of the same nature, but arise from other useless things. Through them, with God's permission, it is, see, again, she points that out. Through them, with God's permission, it is possible for good and bad things to happen. God has decorated the first angel as if with precious stones. Lucifer, upon seeing them shine in the mirror of the divinity, took knowledge from them and recognized that God wished to do many wondrous things. His mind was exalted with pride, since the beauty of the stones which covered him shone in God. He thought that he could do deeds both equal to and greater than God's. And you see, that's the exact problem with the pagans in the New Age movement. That's exactly what it is. They think using God's creation, they're going to do things equal to and greater than God Almighty. That's the problem. And that's from Satan. And so his splendor was extinguished. But just as God restored Adam to a better part, he sent neither the beauty nor the powers of those precious stones to perdition, but willed that they would be held in honor and blessing on earth and used for medicine. Very important. And so this is what she talks about. Mostly she talks about physical ailments, but sometimes she also does talk about stones to help with curses, stones to help with like lust, the problem of lust. And so there could be a very scientific explanation for that we are just not quite aware of yet. or as well, because God is like, once you properly applied science brings you closer to God, believe it or not. But we have this fake science problem going on right now. Um, so that's what I was going to say about that. There's also a community of Saint Hildegard that talks about this teaching. It's a Christian community. I don't know where it is. It says, "Welcome to the Hildegard Haus." So I'm assuming it's probably in Germany because it's spelled Haus. A sanctuary dedicated to Saint Hildegard. Liturgies and prayer services are presided over by ordained ministers. Oh, it is not affiliated with the Roman Catholic Diocese of Cleveland or any diocese religious organization. We identify with the independent sacramental movement and are not in communion with Rome. So that's something I would avoid. However, I thought they had a good points. Let me see here. Yeah, so they bring up the book of Revelation. They say, "We believe the Hildegard house is contributing to creating a new religious paradigm, a new earth, as it is described in the sacred scriptures. In the book of Revelation, chapter 21, the heavenly Jerusalem is said to be adorned with every precious stone and metal. The wall was constructed of jasper, while the city was pure gold, clear as glass. The foundations were decorated with every precious stone. The first course of stones was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th hyacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates made from a single pearl, and the street of the city was of pure gold, transparent as glass." So they have those stones in there for that reason. I thought they said something else worth noting. Hildegard maintained that the natural world, stones, plants, etc., only have the power to heal if God wills it. It is not that the elements have the power in themselves, but rather they become the conduits through which God's healing energy flows. Exactly. It's just like herbs. It's not deniable that herbs have different properties. If I'm feeling particularly upset, even not even just physical, but mental, if I'm like depressed or something, St. John's wort will uplift my mood and make for a better day or, a better night's sleep. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to read from there. Oh, she wrote this one. For Hildegard, everything in the world was part of a divine order. She saw God's finger in every part of creation. Balance for Hildegard was key. She taught that when we are out of balance, either in mind, body, or spirit, our entire being and all of the cosmos will feel the consequences. Regarding our care for creation, in her theological work, Book of Divine Works, which I don't have, Liber Divorium Operum, she wrote the following. As often as the misdeeds of human beings pollute the elements, God will use human torments and calamities to purify them again. And so we see this idea of purification through suffering. That's constant. That's very Christian. For God wants a clean earth and will not allow it to be harmed or destroyed through human actions. Saint Hildegard. Wow. So I guess that's really what I wanted to get at here is God has created the natural order for the use of his people. Satan has come in and distorted that completely. So you have the New Age movement taking precious stones and using them for nefarious purposes, using them outside of God, using them to try to achieve some spiritual enlightenment outside of the sacraments. And so if you're using crystals to achieve spiritual enlightenment, you're wrong. We as Catholics understand where to go for spiritual enlightenment. You shouldn't be participating in any Eastern practices. Even people ask me about yoga a lot. I would never do yoga. Now, I understand the argument that if you're just going to do the stretches, it's fine. The problem is the stretches were literally made as poses of worship to false gods. So I would find another stretching routine. If I'm going to stretch, there's other ways I can do it without having to do these poses. Now, I'm not saying I would never, accidentally or something do downward dog, or I don't even know the poses. I think that's one. I don't really know. But a lot of times what we see happening is there's spiritual rituals like incense being burned in these yoga studios and things like that. And so you have to be very careful. And it's like you can't, there are some truths within the pagan religions that is originated from God himself. Like, for example, saunas. Saunas have many health benefits. Hildegard frequently prescribes saunas in her works to overcome certain anger is one of them. Fasting in saunas, in dry brushes. Like, not, I mean, so there's benefits, but they have to be understood as not being disconnected with God. That's where we run into problems. And so that's what the whole like Masonic thing is about. It's about, using the creation to achieve enlightenment and using your own works to achieve enlightenment. And we know that's false. That's a false teaching. There's no other way. There's no other way to ultimate enlightenment and transcendence and transcending this earth and going to heaven and ultimate truth than Jesus Christ in his sacraments specifically. And so even the Protestants fall prey to this. They think they can do it by reading a book, and that's just not the case. Religion is not an intellectual thing. So anyway, let me stop rambling. I hope y'all have a great day, and I hope that cleared up some questions, because I know I had these same questions when I was trying to figure out what's what. And that would be my advice as far as crystals are concerned, and then to apply that to other, areas. I'm thinking like even like music. So we have our own chants. We have monks that chant. We have Gregorian chant. So I'm not going to go, and those are prayers to God. I'm not going to go listen to Buddhist monks chant because those are not prayers to God. And maybe they'll sound the same and maybe they can relax me and things like that. But there's a spiritual connection is the thing. So, all right. Signing off. Joan of Arc Media out.